Difficulty can be an interesting topic in video games. If a game is too easy, what's the point? But make it too difficult, and many players will drop the game entirely, which is why many developers opt to give players a choice of what difficulty they'd like to play the game at. But what's interesting is the differences between those difficulty settings. One of my favorite difficulty increases was from The Last of Us Grounded mode when it first came out. While not perfect, it felt like it forced me to play the game in a way I enjoyed more. The enemy AI was more aggressive and smarter, attempting to flank you whenever possible. The mechanics available to the player changed too, no longer giving them the ability to see through walls while listening. If you just run straight at an enemy, that often leads to you getting headshotted and killed. All of this culminated in a much more tense playthrough where I'd meticulously be planning my route, making sure to land my shots, and always keeping my head on a swivel so that I wouldn't get ambushed by the new and improved AI. I still felt powerful though, when I played correctly. My guns would kill with one shot, and I didn't feel as though things were artificially made unfair in the name of difficulty's sake. A+, Naughty Dog. I hope this game isn't as bad as it looks. But anyways, unfortunately a lot of games don't seem to get too creative when changing the difficulty of their settings, opting to just increase enemy health and decrease the player's health, or have the same effect with damage outputs for enemies and the player. Unsurprisingly, not a lot of players like this. No one likes sitting there and shooting an enemy bullet sponge for 20 minutes. It's not creative, it's not challenging, it's just tedious. But there are some cases where this approach actually works out well, and Resident Evil 9 is a great example of when this approach to difficulty works perfectly, but also demonstrates some of its biggest flaws. I love the Resident Evil franchise, and I really enjoyed Resident Evil 9. For my second playthrough, I opted for the Insanity difficulty to prove that I am a true Resident Evil gamer. And in those starting hours in the mansion, everything was great. The increased enemy health and damage output, and the increased scarcity of resources lends itself perfectly to Grace's survival horror sections. It forces the player to make more decisions. Do I spend this precious ammo on this zombie that is consistently in the way, or do I try to run past the enemy and risk taking damage from it at some point in the future? And the increased punishment for making mistakes increases the horror aspect, because you know that if that zombie does eat a Grace sandwich, you'll lose all that progress because you haven't manually saved in a while in an attempt to save on ink ribbons. It was great. And I also think it worked well for the Leon sections too. In combat with Leon, I was more cognizant of the ammo I was using, which enemies I wanted to take out first, more aware of the environmental items that might help me in my fight against the undead. But the first hiccup came when I reached the Chunk boss fight with Leon. The boss fight is not hard. It's pretty easy to just keep running away from Chunk and turning around to get a couple shots off. The issue is, he is a big fat bullet sponge. Attempt after attempt, I would just end up running out of ammo. I'd go back to the store, buy a little more ammo, and attempt again, just to have the same result. Just doing the same tedious thing for way too long with no real challenge other than not losing focus. Eventually I killed him and thought, whatever, there's bound to be a bullet sponge encounter here or there on the hardest difficulty of most games. But then we got to the Mr. X boss fight, and it's the same story again, but this time even worse. And it's worse because it just feels unfair, specifically his attacks where he knocks or throws cars at you. These attacks feel like they have randomness involved, and sometimes just felt impossible to dodge. And when getting hit does so much damage on the hardest difficulty, it makes it way more annoying. And again, I would run out of ammo, go to the store, buy more, and try again. It's not a fun process losing to a boss that you feel is unfair. But I got by that and was enjoying my time again for a while until we get to the axe fight with the commander. Hunk. I died so many times to this guy, and I'm sure most people will say skill issue, but it really felt like it was just inconsistency with the game mechanics. I'd go into the boss fight, feel like I was parrying at the same time for the same attack, and then it just wouldn't work. Not to mention, he also had this one animation that I'm pretty sure matches another attack animation, but then he just spins again, and if you try to parry the first attack, you'll get hit. And again, if you get hit on this difficulty, it's a lot of damage, so it gets pretty frustrating. Side note, I played this encounter a lot while playing the Leon Must Die game mode, and it felt a lot more consistent. I don't know if something was patched or I was all of a sudden just really good at the boss fight, but yeah, for my Insanity playthrough, it was a really frustrating experience. And one last complaint, the second portion of the Umbrella facility for Grace did not feel designed for this difficulty at all. There are lickers and zombies, and you don't have the resources to kill them all, but it doesn't seem possible to be able to sneak your way through. I'm sure there's some speedrun route, so maybe this was a skill issue, but I ended up cheesing my way through this part by just luring out the enemies to the part where they are programmed to turn around and then shoot at them from there. All in all, I still enjoyed the playthrough a lot, but there were just some glaring issues with the bosses that I think could have been fixed with just a little more creativity. Instead of just upping their health, what about giving them more attacks for the player to learn? Maybe another phase with new mechanics. Maybe a new animation where Chunk gets through a corridor more quickly and when you see it, you know you won't have time to shoot. Just something other than, oh, this is the hardest difficulty, so you will shoot at the boss for 10 more minutes than on the previous difficulty. I really hope more developers start to get a little more creative with the different difficulty levels. I always like to beat games on their hardest difficulty, and too many times it's just a frustrating, tedious experience.
I'll stop you as many times as I have to.